Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Carl Bahner, and if you're not familiar with him, he is a mix engineer based out of Pennsylvania who has worked with artists such as the Wombats, St. Lucia, Joywave, Hippo Campus, and a whole bunch more. And he's also the co-host of a great audio podcast called Secret Sonics, which you should definitely check out. It's a great podcast too. But in this episode today, we cover a lot of ground. We cover everything from Carl's process when it comes to vocal mixing. We talk about getting low end clear, because if you listen to any of his mixes, his vocals and his low end, man, they sound so good. He's got some of the best vocals I've heard in a long, long time. So we dive into his process in terms of what kind of processing he's doing with the EQ, compression, de-essing, and a whole bunch more. And he actually does some really interesting stuff when it comes to using plugins and how he sets up his signal chain, because it's a little different than what most people would recommend you do. And I think you're going to find that really interesting when we get to that part of the episode. So we definitely cover his vocals, and we talk about low end and how he goes about doing all that stuff. And in addition to working in the studio, Carl also has an education side to his business where he works with people who want to make a living from their audio skills. He helps them focus on marketing their studio, getting clients, using social media, and all kind of stuff. So in this episode, we definitely dive into that kind of stuff as well. So if you're someone who has been thinking about starting up your own studio, but maybe you're not sure of how to get your first clients or how to market yourself online, or maybe you're aware that you need to use social media, but you're like, I don't know what to post. We cover all of that in this episode here today. So yeah, there's a lot of really great stuff in this episode. I think you're going to really love it. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Carl Bahner, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going, man?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I am good. I am recently recaffeinated. You know, I got my afternoon coffee's kicking in. I'm feeling good, feeling happy. The sun is out. It's a beautiful day. Got a little walk in with my baby daughter as she slept in the stroller. So I'm in a pretty darn good place right now.
Sounds like a great day, man.
How are you? I want to know about you. I want to know about you. The audience wants to know about you too.
Yes, that's right. Well, I'm doing well, man. I'm just getting off some mix revisions that I was doing today, and it's been a busy day. And my wife is bringing the dog to the vet today, which sucks. But you never know what to expect whenever you go to a vet. It's always way more than you expect it to be. But
yeah. Well, hope it's all smooth and easy and cheap.
Yeah, he's our dog's been kind of sick over the last month, but he's definitely on the mend. So good things are coming.
Well, that's
good.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Anyway, man, for people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and ultimately how you got into music production and what you're working on these days?
Yeah, I am Carl Bahner. I am a mix engineer and educator out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, right in the middle of Amish country, and it's fun and it's weird here, and I'll get into that later, I'm sure. But so I've been doing music professionally since 2005 and full-time since 2009. I started out as a session drummer and touring drummer, and teaching drum lessons, playing in the Philadelphia region a bunch, and doing some national tours as well, and then ended up kind of naturally transitioning more into the production side of the audio world. Back in 2014, 2015 was when I started kind of getting the bug for it. But it was around 2018 or so when I really made the effort to switch away from drumming and focusing more on the studio side. And ever since then, it's just been a whirlwind. And I was starting to do stuff remotely before COVID hit, and then when COVID hit, the entire world exploded. But I was very fortunate that I kind of had all of my ducks in a row for working remotely before that happened. And in 2020, my mixing business just exploded. And since then, I've been doing about a little over 300 mixes a year with artists in, I think, 26 or 27 countries now. And it's really wild and interesting to see how much has changed in the industry since when I first, got my feet wet in it in the mid aughts to where it is now and where it's going. I think it's a terrifying and exciting wild ride that I'm I'm trying to enjoy as I go through it.
Love it. What made you ultimately get into the production side of things? Like, obviously, it sounded like you were busy with drumming. So what got you into the production side?
Honestly, I was very bored in the van. It's kind of that simple. I had messed with production a little bit before that, but it was never anything serious. It was always just an extension of my drumming. Like it was I had a home studio, but I would be recording my band's demos or just recording friends' bands and just kind of, screwing around more than anything else. Like I thought I was in that stage where I thought I was taking it seriously, but looking back, I was completely just being a goof. But when I was on the road a lot, especially touring the US, there are just a lot of long, boring drive days through the Midwest. And I had the laptop uh, from the label that I was borrowing at the time. This is back in yeah, probably 2014, maybe. Had a little MacBook and had Logic on it, and I started doing remixes for friends' bands just as something to do to kind of pass my time because I don't do well sitting still and twiddling my thumbs. I just don't. And I got very lucky that the friends bands that I got to do remixes for were bands like the Wombats, and the very second one I ever did was for this band Hippo Campus, who I love. Um, but got to do some for Saint Lucia, Penguin Prison, Tokyo Police Club, like a bunch of bands that
Nice.
we had either we were friends with or were touring with, or we had mutual friends, and it was great because I got to learn how to do it by getting my hands dirty, but also getting to do it with really great songs because all of those artists are incredible. And it's very hard. It's very hard to screw up a remix of a really great song. So it was a nice, I don't know, their fantastic songwriting were like the training wheels for me to figure out how to do interesting remixes. And having their support and the files from them and like their official releases like definitely helped me as far as getting my name out there and starting to get not build a fan base necessarily, but at least build my confidence, build my portfolio on that side of it. And what started out as just me doing remixes for friends bands when I was bored in the van started turning into other artists reaching out to me to do remixes, and then other artists reaching out to me to do production. And as I started realizing, oh, this is scratching even more itches for me than drumming does, like creatively, I started making the shift into that because I realized I was able to work with more people in a broader scope creatively than just, being on stage in a band playing the drums. I was able to be a lot more involved with the creative process, and that it just kind of sucked me in. And eventually, it kind of the next thing I knew, it was it replaced drumming as my main source of income. And then I just kind of kept going and seeing where my interests took me and seeing where, the clients were pulling me, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And now I'm primarily mixing and doing additional production on projects. I don't really do remixes anymore. I don't really even do full productions anymore. I just kind of realized, the more I'm going into this, the more I'm realizing what aspects of the recording process really scratch all those itches for me.
Of course. Yeah, I love that, man. So just to clarify, like when you said you were doing remixes, were you like remixing from like the original mix stems, or like were you like doing like dance remixes, or like what did that entail for you?
Oh, for me, I've always looked at remixing like reimagining the song and like reframing it in a totally different way.
Gotcha.
So I would get all the original mix, the mix stems from them, from the artists, but then a good example, I was just thinking about the song yesterday because I used it as the background music for a post I made on Instagram. But I did a remix back in 2015, I think, for this artist Penguin Prison out of New York. The original song was produced by Andrew Mari, who's great producer, great engineer, and he was kind of like I call him my unofficial remix pimp from that era of my life because he was introducing me to all these different artists he was working with at the time. But the original song, "Showed Me the Way" by Penguin Prison, is very electronic indie pop, kind of disco-y. And I wanted to see, well, what would this sound like as a Motown song? So
Cool.
instead of, I kind of like did the opposite of what most remixers would do. And instead of taking a song and making it dancey, I took a very dancey song and I was like, okay, well, let's do all live instruments. So we did like live drums, live percussion, trumpet, saxophones, Hammond organ, guitars, backing vocalists. Like I added more vocalists to it just as a way to see like how can I take the core idea of this song and kind of like reframe it in a way that is somehow so different and new, but hopefully works just as well and sounds like it could have been the original version.
Love that. That's cool.
So that was always the goal. I definitely did not always achieve that, but that was at least the way that I tried to look at it.
Totally. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like you were very much self-taught as you were going through all these stems and making these remixes. And there was something you said that I wanted to touch on, which was that you said that looking back at it, you thought you were taking things seriously when it came to learning your production, but then, looking back at it, you were like, no, maybe I wasn't. So I'm curious to know, like, why do you think that? And like, what do you define as taking it seriously when it comes to learning music production?
That is a great question. I think, oh man, that's a hard one.
I'm just using your words, man.
I know, and you're a jerk because of it. No, so I'll say this: I have a degree in music, but it's in orchestral percussion performance, right? So it's not in audio, it's not in production. It wasn't even in drum set, right? It was in like marimba and timpani and stuff. So I think I had a false sense of confidence. Maybe that's what it is. Like I didn't know what I didn't know, but I thought because I knew so much about, the music side of it and the performance side of it, I knew that there was going to be a lot of what I did and understood and felt that would apply, would kind of like cross over into production. But I didn't really fully understand the nuances and I didn't fully understand how important the artist's vision is and how hard it is to deeply understand the artist's vision.
Gotcha.
So I think that for me, that was, I think, looking back, that was the difference between when I didn't take it seriously versus when I took it seriously. It wasn't how much I was trying and how much I was practicing or how much I was doing. I think it was all about what my focus was on. And my focus was on just having fun and, setting up the mics in a good place and like making some money off of it. And then when I realized, my goal is to serve the song, that was when I think the shift took place.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think a lot of people get really lost in the idea that they need to do everything like technically perfect or do it a certain way, and then they follow rules that they find online. And it's like, no, you always have to have the vision of what the song is and what the artist wants, and that's going to inform your decisions so much more than just like something you saw someone else do online. Like actually customizing your settings to the needs of the song and the needs of the artist, that goes a lot further and gets you that more unique original sound.
And that's something that I did kind of instinctively understand and feel when I was behind the drum set, but I don't think it quite clicked when I was behind the console or behind my computer until later on. And I think, I don't know if it was just a combination of hubris or just not knowing what I didn't know, but I thought I had the artistic vision in mind, but it's a lot deeper of an understanding requirement when you're producing than it is when you're just strumming. Like the depth that you need to get into is more all encompassing. And I think I was going into it and it's like, as long as the drum part sounded good, then cool, the artist is going to be happy, and not realizing how my involvement needs to be with much more than just the drums and much more than just like the EQ settings.
Of course, every musician mixes their own instrument the loudest in the mix and focuses on them. Like that's just like it's one of the first things you do when you're an engineer. It's like you lean into the instrument you know best, and because of that, you sometimes go a little too far with it, and you just have to learn to reel it in and really focus on what the song truly does need and how to get that balance to make everything sound even.
Yeah, and figuring out really what is going to be the most supportive of the energy and the emotion that the artist is trying to achieve. And I think that was it's not a moment, but that landmark in my growth was really coming down to realizing, oh, I need to ask way more questions. I need to really, really make sure that I'm understanding this, not just making assumptions and not just, making assumptions and decisions. It's asking questions.
Love it. So with that said, then, what's your approach to starting with a new project? Like, how do you begin to make sure that you share that vision with the artist and that you can actually execute that properly?
Well, I was just talking to a student of mine earlier today about this, and really the biggest thing that I try to communicate before I start any project is I want to let them know that I mix with a producer's ear. Like I'm listening, even though I'm getting hired to mix, if I hear something that I think is going to help more effectively communicate the vision of the song, I'm going to say something, even if it's outside of the scope of mixing. And I do that even if I'm hired to master something. Like there have been times when I've been hired to master a song, and I'll flag production ideas that I think could help. And I know there are probably going to be some people listening right now that are going to be like, "What the fuck, Carl? Like, how dare you?" But the reason I do that is because before I even like talk prices, like that early in the process, I let them know like this is how my brain works. This is what I bring to the table. And if you want somebody that is going to just, get everything to sound good together and balanced. And, anybody listening, I'm doing very aggressive air quotes right now. Just if you want someone that's going to press the button and just be a yes man and, do exactly what you tell them to do, then go somewhere else. And I'm not saying that in an ego way. I'm saying that I want what's best for the song. I want to do whatever I can to help to make sure that the vision is actually coming across. And if the artist or the producer that I'm working with is not open to suggestions, not saying you have to do it. You could always veto it. But if you're not open to trying things that might more effectively get the emotion across to the listener, then I'm not the right guy. And I'm okay with that. So that's really like when I start a conversation with a potential new client, that's usually where it begins. Just making sure that, we're all on the same team for the greater good.
Gotcha.
And I want to be for the song. And it's like a lot of producers and engineers will say, I'm in it for the song, not my own ego. I want to make sure that the artist is in it for the song and not their own ego.
Very good point. Yeah, it's like so many artists, especially now that people are recording themselves, like there's this tendency to just want to throw everything at it and serve your ego and, throwing crazy guitar solos everywhere you can. And it's like, no, sometimes cutting that is the best thing you could possibly do to make a song sound bigger and clearer and more focused. And so, yeah, that's definitely good advice to be able to give to people to focus on, right?
Yeah, the mute button is my best friend.
Yeah.
Or the negative infinity volume automation is my best friend.
But it's funny that you say that because I think there's a lot of people who are scared to hit the mute button. Like they think that like if they see something in the multitrack that they have to use it because that's maybe the artist's vision for it. But I guess it comes back to what you were saying where it's like having that conversation with people earlier allows them to know that you might mute something, but it's because you think it's going to serve the song better. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And also starting that conversation before you even start the project puts me in a position where I can just shoot them a voice note and say, hey, so I'm working on the mix, and in the second verse, there's a piano part, an organ part, a bunch of percussion layers, and this guitar lick going on in the background, and I feel like there's too many things going on, and the energy doesn't quite dip enough, so it makes the second chorus kind of suffer. It doesn't have enough room to grow. So I just wanted to know if I were to mute, one of those tracks, like what are the most important parts in your mind? What are the most core elements in that verse? Because I might try to turn the other ones down or potentially just remove them for that section to make sure that the energy of the song goes where we want it to go. So I can have that conversation, whether I just do it myself or not, depending on who the artist is. And if it's someone I've worked with multiple times, they usually they trust me enough that they just say, just do it. And they'll ask me questions if they don't like it. But I'll just say, hey, this is what I'm hearing. I feel like there's just too many things trying to grab your attention and it's distracting from the vocals. So what is the priority list in your mind? Obviously, like vocals are going to be number one for the styles of music that I work on. So like vocals are number one, but like after that, like what's the pecking order? So that way I know what I can potentially mute or remove or have it kind of come in and out based on what you think is fundamental versus what you think is just a texture.
Yeah, that makes sense. And those are great questions to ask, not only as a mixer, but as the artist working on stuff too. Like when you're writing ideas down and recording all these different layers and whatnot, it's like ask yourself the same questions because that's going to help you determine whether you're just doing things for the sake of adding or if it's actually serving the song. So yeah, those are good questions to ask for sure. So then when it comes to like starting a mix, for example, do you have like a typical workflow or a process that you typically follow?
Yeah, I typically start with the kick drum because I'm a drummer, so of course I'm going to start with the kick drum. And usually it's usually kick, snare, bass, and then whatever the foundational harmonic element is. And if I can get those to feel pretty good, then everything else can pretty quickly fall into place. And that's just, I work mostly in pop and pop adjacent styles. So typically, vocals and drums are going to be most likely the most important, most prominent things in the mix. So if I don't get that foundation right and don't get the balance right with those kind of core rhythm section elements, then nothing that I do to the vocals is going to work. So I like to try to get the instrumental kind of set up before I even add the vocals in, even though the vocals are ultimately going to be the top priority. But it's so that I can make broad stroke changes to the instrumental balance and the instrumental, mix to make room for where the vocals need to be. And I know that everything gels together instrumentally. So if I end up, putting an EQ on the entire instrumental bus, I know it's going to work together. And I'm kind of moving everything as a whole, as opposed to trying to like individually cut 1,000 different things.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you say you start with like your kick, snare, and bass, like are you just listening to kick, snare, bass, or do you have some sort of rough mix that you're kind of using a little bit?
So usually I have everything just like unmuted, just so I can hear this. I want to hear what the song's going to sound like. Yeah. Obviously, So I'll listen to bits of the rough mix, bits of the individual parts, just to familiarize myself with what's there and what's gonna be there. But then usually I'll start with, I'll start with the maybe kick, snare, bass, rhythm section, kind of like unmuted. Well, not rhythm section. I'd say I usually keep like hi-hats and percussion stuff muted. So I'd say, yeah, kick, snare, bass, and maybe whatever the main harmonic element is. I'll have those unmuted, but I'm not really worrying about balance yet. I'm really just kind of focusing on getting the kick drum to feel right in the room.
Gotcha.
And then getting the snare to feel balanced to that. And then figuring out where the bass needs to go relative to those. And then figuring out where the harmonic element needs to go. And usually it ends up being figure out where the harmonic instruments need to be and then bringing them down like 4 dB because they always need to be a little bit lower in the end result than I put them in the beginning. So I found that tendency that I have, and I just try to get it right away.
It's good to know your tendencies for sure. And I agree with you, though. It's like when you're working kind of just from the instrumental, you can have that tendency to push things louder than they actually need to be in the final mix. And especially, like you were talking about with vocals being the most important thing in so many of the tracks that you work on, it's like, that has to be as loud as whatever your current loudest thing is. And everything else has to just go down in relation to it. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious to ask about your vocals too, because, when I listen to your mixes, like I think your mixes, dude, like you have some of the smoothest, clearest, like in your face vocals that I've heard in a long time. So good on you for that,
Ah,
man. They
ah,
sound awesome.
ah. Whatever the positive equivalent to a dagger in the heart is. That's what that was. Like that was a nice. That was like a love punch to my soul. There should be a word for that, but there isn't. Love
I can't
punch
think of it
sounds
right now,
weird.
but yeah, we'll just go
Yeah.
with Love Punch for now. That's fine.
Well, thank you.
No, but
Thank you.
seriously,
I try
I
really
think your
hard.
vocals sound incredible, and I could tell that you put a lot of emphasis on those. So I'm curious to like dive into like your vocal process a little bit more and kind of understand, what's going into your vocals and why do they sound so freaking good?
Ah, I never get asked that. Wow, thank you. I'm probably blushing aggressively through my beard right now. Um, so I guess what I'll say is that the main thing that I do, my main approach for vocals is that I'm trying to I don't have a good word for this. I am a plugin quantity maximalist, but a plugin uh effect minimalist. I don't know. I don't know how to describe that. I use a lot of plugins that do very, very little.
That's a good
I guess.
summary
So,
of it.
like, yeah. So that's a much better way of saying it. So like for example, I'll usually have 3 or 4 de-essers on lead vocal, all at different places along the chain, all doing very little, all doing very specific things. Same thing with EQs and compressors. Like I usually have like 4 EQs on it, 4 compressors on it, which again, to most people, that learn how to mix from the internet, that sounds like something terrible, and they're probably all, clutching their pearls, I guess. But the way that I look at it is like I've got this big glass top desk, right, that I have in my studio, and it's like at an angle, and like it sounds phenomenal in here, like kind of reflects all the sounds away from me. But my studio is on the 3rd floor of a big old warehouse building. And what I could do, I could have carried this up 3 flights of stairs all by myself, or I could have had, a friend or two help me carry it up those stairs. If I did it by myself, yeah, I could get it to the top, but it's much more likely that I'm going to ding it against the wall. I might potentially drop it. It might break entirely. But if I have a couple friends helping me out, it's lightening the load on me. It's lightening the awkwardness of getting around the corners. And I'm a lot less likely to do any unintentional damage to the desk. And that is how I look at de-essers. That's how I look at compressors. I'm not trying to be a minimalist in the sense that I'm only going to use 1 EQ and 1 compressor and 1 de-esser, because what ends up happening is you have to push them way too hard to get a big, in your face, polished, it's like to do all the things, to get all of the characteristics and adjectives that you want to have in like pop vocals. You're going to have to make each of those plugins do way, way, way too much work. And you're not going to get there because you're going to get all these unintended artifacts, all these, side effects from it. So my plugin chain usually looks like, like crazy. It looks like whenever you see a meme of like, oh, beginner producers, and they have like, 12 plugins on it. And then it's like, top tier producer, and they have like 1 plugin. Number 1, I think that's bullshit. But number 2, I think it's the fact that I'm using a lot of plugins all doing very, very little. So that way they're all just doing their one specific job. They're doing it really, really, really well. And it's helping me to get the end result that I want.
Gotcha. So to dive into that a little bit more then, like you said, like every plugin, if I'm assuming correctly, every plugin has its own job. So how do you know when to maybe add another version of like a de-esser, for example, or an EQ versus, leaning a little harder, or like, maybe with EQ, like would you have multiple EQs, each having their own frequency, or like, what does that look like?
Well, I'll start with the EQ is kind of a little bit easier to explain, because for that, there's that age-old question of, do you EQ before or after compressors? And both, constantly, because every compressor that you use is, and especially the more aggressively that you push it. And when I'm doing a lot of pop stuff, I have to push them pretty aggressively. You're going to have unintended side effects of that. Sometimes that unintended side effect is a lot more bottom end and sub that you didn't even notice otherwise. And I want to make sure that I'm getting rid of what I don't want preemptively, and then also getting rid of what maybe that plugin is naturally, what colors from the plugin it's naturally adding. Because typically any plugin that you use, you might move it like 4 steps forward and 1 step back, right? And especially with compressors, I feel like it's usually like 4 steps forward, 1 step back, and then I'll have an EQ that's just helping to get it that 1 step forward again. And then if I use another plugin, that maybe a second compressor doing something slightly different, again, a couple steps forward, 1 step back, and I'm just using the plugins to kind of compensate for the little bit of, I got unintended or unwanted color or character that the plugins are adding. So that's kind of what makes me decide when I need another one or not. It's just, okay, I added a compressor. What is it doing? Is it making the breaths really exaggerated? And do I need to use like a deep breath plugin, like Isotope or something? Is it making the bottom end way more like big and woofy? Is it making the S's way too aggressive? And it's just a question of, okay, so here's what I'm hearing. Now, am I going to get a better result if I do that 1 step forward after or before? Like with de-essers, for me, usually like the more aggressively I'm pushing a compressor, the more likely I'm going to want that de-esser to happen before the compressor. I'm trying to kind of like soothe them a bit before it gets pushed by the compressor. Because sometimes if the damage is already done, then a lot of times like the de-essers have a hard time smoothing out those S's because there's so much aggression and so many harmonics and everything added to it that it's not playing, like it's not hearing what that plugin is kind of calibrated to find. Same thing when I always try so hard to get my clients that send me any kind of like vocoder files or like Little Alter Boy affected files. I say, just put a de-esser before Little Alter Boy and just de-ess the living shit out of it. Because if you don't, everything in that track is going to sound like whenever there's an S or an F. It's just going to be like a big noise.
Yeah.
And you can't get rid of that. So, and also like when I'm using those kind of affected vocals, it's usually a background part anyway. I'm not relying on the vocoder to get clear sibilance. So we'll try to get rid of that as much as we can, because a de-esser is not designed to listen for, vocoder S's.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
So that's another, go back to the idea of me, making production suggestions as a mixer. That'll be a thing too, where I'll say, hey, could you reprint this thing, but put a de-esser before it, because I think that's going to help make it a lot less shishy and enable me to push the vocoder up a little bit more, because I know that you really want that in the vibe, because you want the vibe of vocoder vocals.
That makes sense. It kind of sounds like you're obviously everything we do is reactive when we're mixing, but it kind of sounds like you're adding plugins based on reacting to the previous plugin. So it's like you try to solve the biggest problem you hear first, and then you add the next tool to fix whatever other problems remain or whatever problems the previous one left. And then you just kind of keep going through that process until you're like, okay, cool, now it's sitting where it needs to be.
Yeah. And I think it's worth it. Do I think it's worth it on every individual track? No, because generally speaking, vocals are the only tracks that I tend to really do that for. Otherwise, I mean, like, yes, I'm going to be doing, yes, I'm using compression and EQ on tracks, but it's very rare that I'm doing it. It's very rare that I'm needing to do it to the extent that I am in vocals, because with pop vocals, where they start and where they end are usually the farthest distance sonically.
Yep.
Like what a raw vocal sounds like versus what it needs to sound like polished in a loud, happy, aggressive pop mix. There's such a distance you have to go. So that's why I have to take so many steps forward, and why I have to then make sure that when I take those little steps back, I'm going back forward again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the vocals are definitely the thing that has the most variables to it. Like a drum set's going to sound like a drum set from the beginning of the song to the end, and you might get somebody who hits a little harder, but it's still going to sound like the drum. Whereas the vocals, like You're gonna have clean vocals, whispery vocals, aggressive vocals. Like there's so much that can happen, and just the way that the voice changes as people shift throughout those different voicings, it's gonna impact how you want to work. So that kind of makes sense. You would need a lot of tools for the vocals to get them where you need to be.
Especially when I'm working with styles where there might be 20, 30, 40 layers of vocals. I'm trying to get them all to play nicely with each other. That then in that case, it ends up being stuff where I'm doing these same sort of processes, but I'm maybe doing more of it on a group bus rather than the individuals. And it's a question of, well, what kind of effects or what kind of processing is going to be better on the individual tracks versus the group. Like a de-esser is going to work infinitely better on an individual track because it's calibrated to listen for a single S. It's not calibrated to listen for a cacophony of S's that are also not happening exactly in time. But then something like soothe, if I want to get rid of some harshness, using soothe on the bus makes sense just because it's not quite as specifically calibrated as a de-esser, and I can just use one instance of it to kind of wrangle all of the backing vocals as a whole.
Makes sense. As far as getting that like in your face vocal sound, how do you like, what do you think about like reverb versus delay and stuff like that? Like when it comes to like creating some depth, but still having your voice like in the forefront of the mix, like what are your thoughts on those?
I know this is kind of sacrilege. I really don't think about it too much.
Yeah. Some people have a favorite, right? Some people go like they're always reverb or they're always delay. So I was just curious to get your take on that.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to use a plate reverb on most vocals. Just depending on how prominent it is, will let you know how platey it is versus just being a texture. But generally speaking, I'm more of a fan of dry vocals. Like the drier that I can get them, the better. And then getting the character and interest from them in other ways, like whether it's through some really subtle distortion or chorusing or some imaging effects or some like very subtle like slapback kind of things. Like I want to get as much character as I possibly can, but generally speaking, I'm working in, fairly dense arrangements. So I don't really need to fill a ton of space unless it's a specific moment, in which case then, yeah, I'll figure out, okay, well, do I want delays here? Do I want reverbs here? Am I trying to create something that is felt or heard? Because reverb is usually more felt than heard, and delays are usually more heard than felt. Obviously, that's, there are exceptions, depending on how heavy-handed you are with it, but that's usually the question of, what am I trying to achieve here? Do I want to create something to fill space, or do I want something to just help to smooth it out and make it feel like it's all in one place? And then that's going to be what pushes me towards reverb or delay or, quadravox or, mishby or, whatever kind of other effect.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like if you start to add a lot of those tools just out of necessity or just out of default, then like you could be totally messing with like how forward something is in the mix. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into, especially when they're getting started. It's like reverb makes everything sound expensive, and so they do it, right?
Yeah, until you have too much, then it's just like, I don't know. Reverb can be kind of like salt on your food, and like really salty food tastes cheap.
Fair, yeah.
So if you want to look at it that way, it's like too much. Reverb makes it sound expensive until you have too much, and then it immediately makes it sound amateur.
Yeah, I agree with that. Right.
Well, I think also, I feel like, I hope this isn't like a hot take, but I feel like a lot of producers and engineers and artists hide behind those kind of effects.
Totally.
They if you have cool reverbs and delays and cool vibes, then it doesn't really matter as much how good the performance was, in their minds, not in my mind, right? So I think that's why, especially more recently, the more, I guess I don't want to say like the better the vocalist, but like you listen to, Taylor Swift or Beyonce or any of like the, big pop stuff, Dua Lipa, like the vocals are pretty damn dry. there's not a lot of stuff. There is some space to it, but the wet dry mix of it is pretty damn dry. And I feel like if I can find music, try to find artists that can, put themselves out there and do dry vocals or dry-ish vocals, then that's going to force me to try to work even harder to make sure those vocals really do sound great. And that's, I think, ultimately my goal is to see how great can I get these vocals to sound without hiding behind anything. And if I can get them to sound good without hiding behind anything, then it's easy to make them loud in the mix.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, to transition to another instrument that I think that, again, your mixes, like, you're amazing with, and I'm curious to know, maybe this involves a little less processing than your vocals, but when it comes to low end in your mixes, dude, again, like, your low end, like, you have this tendency to get songs that feel big and have so much weight to them, but they're not muddy, and the low end doesn't swallow up other instruments. So as far as getting that low end to feel big but still polished and clean, like, what are your normal approaches to that?
I I almost always have a high pass filter on my subs, for my on my kick drum and on my basses. And it's like a 6 dB slope at like 30 hertz. Like, it's not
Nothing crazy.
anything, nothing crazy. Like, most people aren't gonna, you're not gonna really, it's one of those things where you're probably not gonna hear a difference. However, all of the compressors and limiters that they will eventually go through, um, mathematically will be part of the calculations, so whether or not I can hear 10 hertz in a synth bass, the compressor's sure gonna sense that it's there, sure gonna base its math on that. It's sure gonna push the limiter even if I can't hear it. So it ends up being easier to control when you're getting rid of all the things that I can't really hear anyway.
That makes sense.
Um, and and also, again, this is one of those things that I feel like you'll see in YouTube videos, and people will tell you, "Oh, you got to get rid of all of like the unnecessary low end," and then you'll get like another level where you're like, "Oh no, that's bullshit. You don't have to do that. You can keep the low end in." And then I feel like then you hit another level where you're like, "Oh, actually, maybe we should get rid of that stuff," where we realize, "Oh, there's actually truth to that." Um, and it's a matter of just being very thoughtful and conscious of what instruments do I want to be able to take up space down there. Usually, definitely kick, definitely bass, usually snare drum, usually I think of what else I would really keep down there. Um, it usually, some sound effects and things, but it's really a question of how often do I want things happening in the very, very bottom?
Yeah.
Do I want it to be, do I want the bottom of the lead vocal? Usually not. Maybe during very sparse verses or a bridge where the bass cuts out, then maybe I will allow a little bit more of like the deep body of a voice to come through, or the deep body of a piano to come through. And then I, kind of high pass some of the really, really low parts out of it during the rest of the song when other instruments are in. But that's really, I think it's starting with a conscious effort of deciding what is allowed to be down there,
Mhm.
and then saying, okay, well, this should be the top priority. This should not. And for me, generally speaking, I'm a drummer, so of course I'm going to kind of lean towards the kick being the one that wins over the kick versus bass kind of battle. Um, but I don't usually EQ them differently. Like I a lot of people will do or talk about doing. Like, I don't usually dip one and boost the other. I generally just do lots of very subtle side chaining, and it's more a matter of side chaining it so that way the bass is just getting out of the way in those little micro moments where the kick's hitting. And also, I'm very quick to swap out kick samples, like, right away. Like, if the kick bass relationship is not working, it's usually most easily and quickly and effectively fixed by just finding a different sound in the first place. And again, I'm working primarily in pop and pop adjacent stuff, so it's a lot more electronic, like electronic drums based styles. So it's obviously a different conversation if I was doing, you know folk music or something. But that's usually what I'll do. It's kind of the opposite of my vocals, where my vocals I will very daintily use, 15 plugins on it to get it to where I really want it to be. But for the kick drum, it's like I will yeet that baby into the sun if it's not right, and just replace it with something that's going to fit the overall song better.
That kind of makes sense. It's like you can't change a vocal, unless you get a different singer, you can't change it. But a kick drum, nobody's going to really notice if you changed it. It's not necessarily the personality of the band, so you have a lot more flexibility with it.
And I think also because I'm a drummer and I'm so attuned to how the kick drums sound and feel, I obviously I'm not just replacing it with a totally different sound. I'm just asking myself, okay, here's my existing kick drum sound. What do I feel needs to change? Like it doesn't have enough attack. It has too much body. It's too short. It's too long. It's too, pillowy. Like what are the things about it that I want to change? And then instead of trying to fix that and using EQ or compressors or transient designers or things to try to make it into something that it's not, it's like, okay, I'm going to go into Splice. There are, 6.5 gajillion different kick drum sounds on there. So I'm just going to try to find the one that I think is closest to this original, but also has the aspects that I wish this one had. So I'm not trying to just replace it with something totally random. I'm trying to find maybe like a slightly elevated version of what I've got now. Almost like treating the kick as like the demo and then trying to find like the one that's going to really just check off all the boxes, not just 3 out of the 5 boxes that the original kick sounds check off.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that when you're the mixer as well, and maybe you haven't like been involved in the production and recording process, it's like sometimes you have to think about like, okay, what actually sounds best in the context of this mix I'm about to make? And, maybe they didn't record it properly. So you have to kind of just find what's going to get you that vision that the band and yourself ultimately are chasing.
Yeah. And also this is back to that, the conversation that I have with the artist before we start. Like most of them, if not all of them, know I'm probably going to do that anyway. Like and that's why they're coming to me, because they know that I'm a drummer. They know that I've been doing this for so long. They like the sound of the drums in my mixes. So clearly, like that's why they want me on their team for this. So it's not something that I'm trying to like go behind their back and sneakily do it, or like the stories about people that would, when the bass player would leave, they would just go in and like recheck all the bass parts. Like this is not that. This is part of why they're coming to me. This is it's not a thing I'm doing behind their back. This is like the reason that they want my involvement in it. But I even had situations where I got hired to be the mastering engineer, and they would end up having me replace the kick drum. It's like as wildly different in the different parts of the spectrum of the scope of what I'm doing, but it's all art. We're all on the same team, and we're all trying to get the best results. So if that's what they are happy with me doing, that's what they want me to do, and I'm obviously happy to do it, and that's going to get a way better end result than trying to, do all sorts of trickery to the low end. Like, yeah, we're on the same team. We're doing this together, and I'm very fortunate that I've kind of curated my clientele to be people that want that relationship, and they want that kind of collaborative process, even if it's beyond the scope on paper of what a mix engineer does, or what a mastering engineer does, or what a drummer does.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we're just trying to make it sound the best it can, and we're all working together to make that happen. So that makes a lot of sense there. I mean, I could talk your ear off about your production process forever, but I do want to shift gears a little bit. And I know that in addition to your mixing and production work, you also focus on helping people with marketing their home studios as well. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit, because I know that there's a lot of people listening to this that are, they're learning the process or wanting to get into it themselves and, open up their studio and make some money off their hobbies and stuff. So when it comes to getting started with attracting clients, like where do you generally recommend people get started there? Like, should they be doing outreach? Should they be building a portfolio, a website, like all of the above, none of the above? What do you recommend there? Loaded question.
So loaded question, but it's a good one. So I I look at client acquisition kind of like gardening. Okay. So doing outreach and starting conversations, whether it's totally cold or it's, reaching out to other bands that commented on a post from a band that you've worked with, whatever that is, whether it's like a little bit warm, whether they followed you and it's really warm, whether they're, whatever the uh, pre-existing relationship was, whether there's any pre-existing relationship or not. Doing that outreach is like planting a seed, but without fertilizer or without any kind of, nutritious soil, that seed's probably not going to grow. So to me, your social media content, like your website, all of the places that people can learn more about you, and not just learn about what you do, but learn more about what it's like to work with you, what the experience of working with Carl is like, what the experience of working with Mike is like. But that's like the fertilizer. And then your consistency with putting out content and following up with your outreach, that's like the watering can. And really, you kind of need all of those things. Because if you just do a bunch of cold outreach or do a bunch of outreach, but you don't have anything to show people and they don't have the opportunity to get to know more about you without having to have an actual conversation with you, which is a lot to ask of people these days because they don't owe you anything. Like they don't have any reason to talk to you, right? So if you can make it easy for them with your content and your website to let them not just know what songs you've worked on, but also see, what your vibe is, get a sense of like, can they trust you or not? Are you the right fit for them? Like it's the combination of those things that you really need. And the social media content, I think, is probably the most important out of the three, because at least it's the only one out of those three that's going to get people to really build their trust with you. And then doing the outreach, doing the follow-up is pouring gas on the fire.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Because I think one thing I've heard from many people in my audience is that like anytime someone says like, "Oh, you should do social media," they're like, "Oh, I hate social media. I don't want to be on there." And but I think that what you said there is true. It's like it's something that you can do to build trust with people, and then that creates more of those personal interactions, and those are things that people enjoy a lot more than just posting a random image or something.
Yeah, and what I always say to people that say that to me is that you don't hate social media, you hate cringy content. You're not like against using social media to grow your business. You're against making cringy, like try hard, stupid, trendy stuff to grow your business. And one of the things that I do with my students is I really try to help them figure out, okay, well, what's going to work for you? What are the things that you can talk about? You can, you know, you can share with your audience. What are your tastes, experiences, and perspectives that you can share with potential clients that is going to make them think, oh, holy shit, like this is the person I've been looking for my entire life. I can't believe I've never found them before. That's really it. It's not about trying to go viral. It's not about trying to get a ton of views and a ton of likes. It's not even about getting a ton of followers. It's about just realizing who do you want to reach out to, who do you want to attract? Who do you want to work with? And what are the things about the complex human of you that they're going to be the most interested in? So it's not about changing who you are to try to like become attractive to them. It's just realizing, okay, well, my ideal mixing clients are going to probably appreciate the fact that I listen to a lot of equal parts Lorna Shore and Kids Bop. They're probably going to find that endearing because I have kids. But my kids love Lorna Shore. I love Kids Bop. It all just makes sense. But I also love playing miniature golf. Like just because I love that doesn't mean it's going to necessarily be super relevant to them. So it's not about me changing anything about myself. It's just trying to understand, well, what is the bridge that's connecting the people that I want to help and the people that I think find the most value in what I can bring to the table, and what parts of me are going to make them realize that value and see that value.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think what happens is a lot of people, like you said, like people hate cringy content, and it's like when they think of, oh, I've been told I got to go on social media and market myself, they think they have to do all of the cringy stuff that they've seen other people do, and that's what turns them off. Or they feel like they're having to try hard to make content, but it sounds like you're kind of coming from a place of like, just do the thing that's the most natural to you, and like like document your life. That's going to attract people that are going to be into you and all the things you're into, and you're going to attract like-minded people.
Yeah, and that's why I made this like free download PDF where it's 370 social media prompts for Studio Pros, and it's not for the purpose of doing them all chronologically. It's just literally like, here's like 40 pages of ideas. Just scroll through it, and if something jumps out at you that gives you an idea in the moment, record it. Like it's just there's a whole bunch of ideas that could potentially inspire you, and when you find one that inspires you, film it. Because if you go into it feeling like, oh, I have to record something, and last week I wrote on my calendar that I'm going to film a video about X, Y, or Z today, if you're not in the right zone for it, it's going to come across that way. You're going to come across like you're trying really hard, or it's going to come across very hostage video-y, versus if you have, a big list of ideas and you're like, oh, okay, like the one could be something like, do you have, like, what was the very first instrument that you ever owned, and do you still have it? And it's like, oh, just cool. I have my little kid piano right here, and I got this when I was 3, and I used it on a song 2 weeks ago because something about the tone of this, little key piano just makes me, it sets a certain vibe, and it felt perfect for the chorus of the song. And all of a sudden now you can like talk about a song you worked on and talk about your thought process of, why you chose this, toy instrument from 40 years ago that you thought is going to add the right vibe to this song.
Yep.
And sometimes you look at that and you'll see that same thing and be like, nah, I don't really have any cool toys from when I was young. And you just move on to a different question. Like you just don't do that one. But I think that's the biggest issue that people have with making social media content, is just not knowing where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And not knowing how to find their voice with it.
Absolutely. Well, I think too that like one of the things with social media that maybe some people don't like about it is that sometimes it can feel like you're working to make this post, you make this post, and you're just kind of putting it out in the ether, and you're not necessarily having conversations. And so, you alluded to this earlier, like it doesn't just take social media to attract people. It's like, it's a combination of different elements. So, outreach is obviously kind of going to fill that gap where you can have more of those interactions with people. And if I'm not mistaken, you set a goal for yourself this year to do a lot of outreach, right?
1,000 conversations. Yeah.
1,000 conversations. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit, and what a warm outreach looks like, and how to go about doing it in a way that doesn't feel cringy or intimidating?
Yeah. So starting 1,000 conversations with new people in a year sounds like a lot, but then you realize that's less than 3 a day. So if you wait until May to start, then yeah, it's going to be kind of a lot. Or if you feel like you have to do it in big chunks, if you say, oh, every Wednesday I'm going to set aside time to do 20 outreach messages, like, yeah, that's going to burn you out real quick. But doing outreach has been something I've been doing for a long time, and it's just part of my process. Like, that's just, I just, like some people will block off time for, mixed revisions or for replying to emails, whatever it is. Like, that's just part of, running a business. Like, you gotta get leads, like it's even, I think of it this way. Even if you have a steady client base of all happy return clients, and you don't have to, like, you have enough work coming in, you don't have to do outreach. Or you think you don't have to do outreach. You think you don't have to do social media. Well, I'm 38, going to turn 39. I don't plan on retiring anytime soon. I want to keep doing this until I'm too old to, copy paste a tambourine part into the last chorus. So if I do I think that my happy return clients right now are going to come back to me consistently for the next 30 years? That would be great, but probably not, right? So like at some point I'm going to need to get more clients. I'm going to need to I need to think more than just what does the next month look like for me. I need to look at what does the next 30 years look like for me. And if I want to have a sustained career, I want to make sure that I have enough people interested in working with me that I could kind of not sit back, but I can feel confident that I'm taking control of the lead generation and I'm taking control of the longevity of my career rather than just taking control of the next 3 or 4 weeks and doing, 3 or 4 weeks at a time. I think that was a bit of a side tangent, and I forget the exact question that you asked.
Well,
me,
no,
that
makes a lot of sense. And I was going to say, like, I agree with that. And I think that the way you mapped out 3 a day makes so much more sense than like feeling like you need to just blast through it at all. Like I remember when I first started, I was doing that. I was like once a month in my calendar, I'd try to blast out to like a ton of bands in my CRM. And it was just exhausting to like try to do that. And then like the follow-up just felt like very, like it was just too condensed and it just drove me nuts. So I love your approach of just like, make it casual, make it 3 a day. It's like so little to do in order to help your career long-term. As far as performing outreach and like, how to reach out to a band, like what does a typical cold outreach look like from you?
I mean, so before we go to this, can I go back to, I have something else I wanted to say about
Sure, yeah.
Like the 1,000 outreach. So the thing, and why I said about how out of the outreach, social media, and the follow-ups, why like the social media is the one that kind of helps to build that trust more. If you're doing the content consistently, you're also going to start just getting followers more consistently, which is going to be easier conversations to have. And if you're making content that is actually enticing and exciting and relevant to the people you're trying to attract, then those followers are going to be, qualified followers, not just random people on the internet that thought that your meme about Taylor Swift's album was funny, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, like I stopped counting how many I'm doing because I'm probably like I needed to do 3 a day. I'm probably doing like 6 or 7 a day now, just because my content is getting me followers, and I don't have a huge reach. Like I only have like less than 3,000 followers on Instagram, but everyone that is following me is like exactly the kind of person that I want to be following me. So that is way more valuable to me than having, 50,000 people that just thought that my memes are funny or thought that my gear is cool, right? Or that my production tips are neat. Like that's not what I'm trying to do. So I just want to say, like, so that said, like I'm just doing a lot of, I guess say warm outreach right now, because there are people that have already followed me. So it's me kind of like following up with their follow to sort of strike up a conversation if I feel like they could be somebody that I could actually help. Not looking at it as somebody that could pay me. I'm looking at it as, is that somebody that I could help? So going back to like the outreach, let's say that it's just like a totally cold outreach that I don't have any relationship with them, but it's an artist that I really want to work with. Generally speaking, there are a couple things that I do. The first thing and the single most important thing is I will figure out what their real name is. It sounds so simple and stupid, but if they don't follow me, I'm going to end up in their message requests. And then they're only going to see the first 20 characters, something like that. So if I just say, hey, or hey man, or anything that doesn't sound like a person, they're probably not going to read it. They're going to either assume it's a bot or assume it's spam or just assume it's not worth their time. But if I can find out what their real name is, especially if it's not obvious and listed on their profile, and they see me like saying their name to it, as simple as it is, they're going to think, oh, maybe this person actually knows me, or at least this person took the time to figure that out. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to make myself not a bot. So if you don't know what it is, literally just go to Google and type in like, artist name, interview, and just see if they've done any like blog interviews or anything. And usually you can find out what their actual name is. If you can't do that, you could also just go into, like, if you have Spotify and go in the credits and just see who the song was written by, and a lot of times you'll see it's their actual name instead of their performer name, their stage name. So the biggest thing I'll make sure that I find out what their actual name is.
So true. The number of messages I get that are like, "Hey, sir," or "Hey, master, your mix." It's like, well, you don't know who's behind the company then, obviously. Like,
yeah, it's immediately. It's just like that's the worst first impression.
Yeah,
is that you didn't take 30 seconds to figure out who the person is you're messaging. And if your goal is to not just get a new client, but your goal is to develop a long-term relationship with somebody so that way you create art with them for years to come, spend 30 fucking seconds looking up their name. You know what I mean? Like that's, I'm sorry if I can't swear on your podcast, but swear. I'm so passionate about that. So figure out the name. And then I always mention a specific song that I listened to that I found. Like, what is the song that I heard? And then I'll do one of two things. I will either mention the specific emotion that it made me feel and at what moment in the song. Like, I listened to I think of a song title. Mike is Handsome. That's the Mike is Handsome remix.
Great song.
I was listening to Mike is Handsome remix, and I loved how the second verse kicked me in the face. I did not expect it to be so huge. I was really expecting it to be, much more gentle, but the way that the guitars just caught me off guard made me so excited to be so surprised. Right? Like, it's as opposed to like, your snare sounds really good. I like your voice. It is a song, like trying to be kind of specific about that. So that's one thing I'll do. Or the other one, which I tend to do more often, because this is how I listen to music. I instinctively connect the dots of trying to think of who their influences are. So I would say something like, I listened to Mike is Handsome remix, and it reminds me of a cross between Casey Musgraves, Haim, and maybe even a little bit of the Dresden Dolls, which is not something that I expected to hear. It's like me trying to, piece together who I think they listen to, which if I'm right, then that shows right away that we have mutual influences and we speak the same kind of musical language. And if I'm way off, which I'm not way off very often. I don't think I've ever been like that off. But sometimes there will be artists that I mention that they never heard of. But then I've had multiple artists tell me like that they've listened to some of the artists I told them that they sound like, and they became obsessed with that artist. So then I end up being like the cool friend that introduced them to their new favorite band. So I've never had a bad experience doing that. If I'm nervous about it, I would sometimes put like, I hope you take that as a compliment, or like, I hope you don't hate any of those artists. I really promise I mean that as a compliment, LOL. Like if I want to just diffuse the situation there, but no one's ever really been upset about that. And then I'll either just kind of leave it there and just say, anyway, I hope you're having a great week. Yeah. I just kind of like just as a way to start a conversation. Or if I'm feeling direct, I might say something like, I don't know if you have a mix engineer on your team or not, but I would love to talk about music to see if I could maybe be a good fit for your team. Based on what I'm listening to, I feel like I would be, and I'm happy to send over some examples if you want. But either way, I'm just hoping you're having a really great week, and I hope to hear back from you. It's if you want to make a pitch, you can. I don't always make a pitch.
Yeah.
Because I look at outreach as an opportunity for me to figure out if I want to work with them, not as an opportunity to pitch my services. It's more me trying to get a conversation going so I can decide if I think I'm a good fit.
That's a good point, because you might just go hardcore for the pitch and then realize like, oh shit, now I got to work with this band that I really don't like.
I feel like anybody listening here that has had clients in the past they've had clients like that where they went for it and then got, I don't know, engineer's remorse. I don't know what the what the word would be for that, but they realized, oh, I should not have gone out of my way to try to get this client because they are just douches, And I look at the outreach, which hopefully will make it easier for people to kind of wrap their head around it. It's like, I'm not going into it to find new clients. I'm going into it to find new friends, and generally speaking, those friends will end up wanting to hire me if they are a really good fit.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like, people, one thing that's come up on the podcast a lot is like people talk about like, oh, if you want to be successful in this industry, you need to network a lot. And it's like, well, how would you interact with someone in person? Like you're not going to just be like let me tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, you should hire me, guy. Like you need to like work people in, like, have conversation and warm up the people and, interact and see if it actually is a good match or,
Yeah. Because you don't know if you're a good fit or not. Just because like you like their music, like that's such a small part of what is involved in developing long-term relationships, like deep, meaningful relationships with your clients. So is it the most effective is it the most efficient way to do outreach? I'm sure some marketers will tell you no. I'm sure more traditional salespeople will tell you no, that you should just kind of go right for the kill and try to, waste as little time as possible. But I'm not selling vacuums. You know what I mean? I'm trying to build long-term relationships with artists that I do. I'm not just trying to do one song for them. I'm trying to do 50 songs for them over the next 10 years. Right. So to me, it's worth it because even if only 1 out of 100 people end up hiring me, they're going to be hiring me for every song for the next couple of years.
Yep.
As opposed to hiring me for, to buy my, I don't know, $200 vacuum and my commission's $30. I don't know how sales works in the vacuum industry. I'm just making an assumption there.
Yeah, but you don't have a relationship with your vacuum salesman who every 6 months they're calling you to ask how your vacuum's doing and how clean your house is and stuff like that, right? So it's we're working with people at a deeper level here.
Yeah. Until the day that Sweetwater starts selling vacuums,
Fair.
And then you will start getting getting emails every 6 months.
I love that. Tip for vacuum people, guy. Partner up with Sweetwater. Yeah.
Does your snare suck? Oh, no, I don't know.
Yeah.
Your mixes suck. So do these Dyson octagons. I don't know. I'm just...
Yeah, there's going to be some new Dyson instrument that comes out soon. Yeah. Carl, dude, I could chat your ear off about all this stuff. Like, there is so much more that I want to talk to you about, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. If people want to learn more about you and learn more about your teachings and all that kind of stuff, maybe even work with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I would say the best way would first go to carlbahner.com. I would spell it, but you're also just, you can look at your screen because my name's going to be on there, I'm assuming. But either going to my website or going to Instagram and just following me and either saying hi or waiting 2 minutes, and I'll probably end up reaching out to you if you follow me anyway. So, I don't bite. I promise. I like having conversations. I like hearing about people's stories. I like hearing about your goals for either for your music or for your production career. I love finding people that I can help, whether it's to help make your songs better, help you make more money, whatever it is. Like I love doing it, and I get very excited about it. So please just come say hi. I know every podcast episode ever ends with, how can we find you? But I want you to more than just find me. I want you to talk to me. This is an open invitation to come actually have a meaningful chat.
Love that. That's great, man. Dude, thank you again for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Of course. I'm so thankful for you to have me.
Right on. So that was my conversation with Carl Bahner, and I really enjoyed that. He's such a great dude. Loved chatting with him and thought he shared a ton of awesome stuff here. And yeah, I loved getting into his vocal processing and how he goes about approaching his massive plugin chain that he's got, and why he does things that way as opposed to trying to use fewer plugins and doing a lot more on each of those plugins. So I think that what he said made a lot of sense. And I think that the biggest thing that you could take from that is that every single part of your signal chain impacts the next thing in line. And you need to be aware of that as you're mixing because it can really impact a lot of the decisions that you make along the way in terms of how far to go with a specific tool or when to add more plugins to your list. So at the end of the day, it's like you have to get the sound you want, and whatever that plugin chain looks like, as long as you get the results that you want, that's all that matters. So I thought that it was great to learn more about how Carl processes his tracks. And I also really, really enjoyed getting into the segment where we talked about building your studio and marketing yourself and how to attract the right people for your studio business and how to ultimately network better and not do it in a way that feels sleazy or corny or whatever. I think that the advice that Carl shared here is really great stuff that if you put it into practice, it's going to make sure that you can attract better artists to work with you in your studio, and you can start to make some money off of it too. So, who doesn't want to earn from their skills, right? So with all that said, I really enjoyed this episode, thought there was tons of good stuff here. And if you like this episode, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And if you're looking for help with your mixes and you're feeling stuck with them, you're not quite sure what you need to be doing in order to get them to that pro quality, and you're tired of feeling like your songs only ever sound like demos, well, I would love to help you. And inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, that's exactly what I do. I work one-on-one with my students, going inside of their mixes and helping them figure out what is needed to take their songs to that next level and to get the sound that they hear in their heads to come out of their speakers. So if you're looking for help and you want actionable feedback on your specific songs to get them sounding every bit as good as you expect them to, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. And on that page, you can find all the details of the program. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you to learn more about your music and learn more about your process to see how I can help you. And if it seems like I can truly help you inside of this program, then I'd love to share all the details and have you inside, because everyone that is part of this program has been seeing amazing results. And that is in part due to the fact that I only work with people who I truly believe I can help. So if you're interested in learning more, again, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude, and you can find all the details there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. Talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.